Hello everyone. Today I want to bring a video talking a little bit more about why it is I'm not too happy about Yuno and her value, right? As you guys know, I made like an entire rant video where I was just frustrated with, someone like Yuno locking half of her amp ability behind basically Augusta. And since then, I've legit only been getting constantly, every single day, videos on my YouTube feed of people talking about Yuno, how she's gonna be a good pull, how she's gonna age incredibly well, people are gonna regret skipping her. And I want to make a video going a little more in depth as to why it is I think the way I do when it comes to Yuno's value. Right. So right here, I will be using ChemX32's calcs as a reference to kinda get my point across. You can feel free to disagree, however, hear me out, right? So here it is where you can see the Augusta calc, no longer work in progress. I believe Chem is done with this. Maybe he'll update it more in the future. Who knows, right? You can see everything here. Signature, sequence jumps, the best sets to use, and especially teams. And it's here where you can see that Yuno S0R0 with Augusta is 19% better than with Mort Teffy S6 Mist, right? And you need to keep in mind that Yuno is, in this case scenario, able to give her full amp. Outside of a team where she wouldn't be able to give her full amp, the difference between her and Mort Teffy would be in the single digits, right? And you can also see she does around 85k more personal DPS than Mort Teffy. Of course, this is an advantage she has. However, this is where I kind of want to talk about this. I've seen a lot of the justification for Yuno having her buffs be pretty restrictive because she has good sub DPS, right? However, the problem I personally have with relying on a character's value when it comes to damage is that damage is very easily power creepable, right? I've used this exact same argument in HSR. Damage will only temporarily look crazy for the newest units, and then a year later, that damage is much more insignificant compared to what it used to be. So Yuno giving a personal, higher damage increase than Mort Teffy, it does give her a bit of an edge, but that edge becomes over time less and less of like an important thing because of DPSs and characters simply becoming stronger, right? So this is why I don't put too much merit personally into supports that I kind of rely on their sub DPS to perform, because it's just going to age incredibly badly going into the future, right? I already did the number over here, by the way, so for those curious what this number is, this is how much better Yuno is at amping Augusta compared to S6 Mort Teffy. It's 15.7% increase for Augusta's damage, going from the 1.2 million to the nearly 1.4 million. So that's right, even with the extra 40% damage amp that Augusta can take advantage of, technically Yuno is only better at amping said DPS by around 16%. So if you were to remove the 40% old damage amp in Augusta teams, once again the difference would be single digits, would be incredibly close to Mort Teffy S6 Mist with Moonlit Clouds. Because you need to keep in mind, Mort Teffy does have 20% attack on his S6, and because he's able to use Mist, I do believe that's another 10% attack, and if you have more refinements on your Mist, I'm pretty sure it becomes even larger of an attack buff difference, right? Something I've realized being in this Wua community recently is that attack buffs are incredibly underrated. For some reason, people think it makes like no difference. However, Mort Teffy giving that much extra attack compared to someone like Yuno does give him a really solid advantage, and it's why he's able to catch up so well. So let's say theoretically Augusta didn't have this shield refreshing mechanic, and she wouldn't be able to take advantage of Yuno's extra 40% ult damage amp. Well, this would then lead to Mort Teffy being on the same level as Yuno. Actually, he'd probably buff more than Yuno for the main DPS, but Yuno could slightly make up for it currently with her own sub DPS. However, because of his better buffing, given time and the stronger a main DPS becomes, he would actually catch up to Yuno and could one day actually surpass Yuno, depending on how much stronger the DPSs in this game gets, right? So I hope that was a good way of me explaining it so that you guys can kind of understand. Her personal damage is an edge she has, but personal damage never ages well in gacha games, especially ones such as these. And her amping ability at S0R0 is actually worse than Mort Teffy's amping ability, which is, you know, questionable, right? So you can pull Yuno if you want to. I do still think she's a solid upgrade over Mort and Augusta teams. I also think that she's a solid upgrade for Gian teams. However, for Gian specifically, the reason why she's so much better than Mort is because you can run wheelchair, right? I believe Chem has it down here. Yuno, Gian, Chacona, S0R1. This should be the best in slot team for Gian now. However, the thing you'll notice is that Yuno plus Chacona actually do as much, if not slightly more damage than Gian himself. In HSR, we call this wheelchair. It's where sub DPS supports, usually newly released ones, out damage a year-old DPS in their own team, and so it's called wheelchair because it's actually the supports doing most of the work. That is exactly why Yuno is such a big upgrade for Gian's team. It's not necessarily that she's super strong, it's simply that Gian is so outdated that his damage output is a bit sad, right? You can also see here, you can use her as an alternative over SK or Spectral Rover in Zanny teams, but it's not going to be better than either of them, right? And you can see down here, an actual team where, you know, Gian gets a bit more focus, 800k or whatever, right? So I hope I was able to get across my issue with Yuno here. I'll explain it one more time. Her buffing capability is worse than Mort Teffy at S0R0 if you can't take advantage of the 40% ult damage amp from refreshing shields gimmick. And so it doesn't really make her ult too worth it for increasing main DPS's damage, and even though her own personal damage does have an edge, it would only decrease in value for increasing total team DPS as time goes on, to the point Mort Teffy would just slowly catch up because of his better buffing and newer DPSs being stronger, right? Love you all. Hope you have a great day. Hope you have a great night. I am waiting until the multipliers come out for Galbrena and Yuno to finally make a video on that. Sorry, but I don't want to kind of spread misinformation because I know, you know, especially in the Wua community, they for some reason treat leaks like incredibly fucking badly, right? And so they take anything as misinformation. So I am trying my best to just wait it out and then give my opinion when we have more shit, right? Love you all. Hope you have a great day. Hope you have a great night. I'm starving, and peace.